So I want to be talking about a story in Numbers 13. It's the story of the Israelites on the edge of the promised land, that first generation that came out of Egypt on the edge of the promised land, the edge of their victory. And I want to look at what truths that we can learn for us today, because there's some similarities between us right now and them at that time. Even though this happened in 1500 BC, we're going to see that this passage has a lot to teach us. But before we read this, I want to give some history about what's going on at this moment. See, 600 years before Numbers 13, which we're going to get into, God made a covenant with a man named Abraham. How many of you guys are thankful for Abraham? Right? It's called the Abrahamic covenant. And in the covenant, God made some promises to Abraham. One, as we know, that his descendants will become as numerous as the sands in the seashore. But also in it is something called the land covenant, or the promised land, that God promised to give Abraham and all of his descendants a land that they can have. And this wasn't going to be any normal land. It's not going to be the nasty land in my backyard that only grows weeds, okay? It was a better land. It says that this land, this promised land, was a land flowing with milk and honey. And that means that it was a rich land, a nutritionist rich land, that the crops would grow big and the fruit would grow. But it wasn't just a land flowing with milk and honey. As you read through the Old Testament, you find out that this land that God had promised to give the Israelites, that they were waiting for, was already going to be built for them. They didn't have to build it. Throughout the Bible, it says there's going to be wells that they didn't have to dig. How many of you guys would love to buy a house and find a well that's already dug on your property? Not permitted, government doesn't know about it. Amen, right? It's my water. Wells you don't have to dig. Cities that they wouldn't have to build. Roads that it was built for them. Roads that they didn't have to pave. Starbucks already on all the corners of these cities. Amazon truck drivers already trained to completely miss driveways and run over all your plants. They were solid. I sometimes think that if you fail your driving test, you automatically get an Amazon driver job. Do you guys notice that? You guys have the same problem? It's like they get paid more to off-road than they do to driveway road. This was a land that they had been waiting and wishing for, that they have been so excited about. This was that promise, because remember, up until this Numbers 13, which we're going to read, up until this point, they were wanderers, sojourners. They were slaves. They never possessed their own land. They were a people without a home. They always had to move from this area to this area to this area so that their cattle could graze. They never got a place to stay, and then slaves for 400 years. And now, where we're picking it up, Moses had come on the scene. We know the deal, the 10 plagues, the Red Sea parts, they cross, and now they're on the edge of that promise. They're on the edge of a 600-year promise that they've been waiting for. They look out right across the Jordan River. It's the only thing that stopped them. And they could see the land. How many of you guys would be excited at that point? I was thinking about things that we get excited about. How many of you guys were excited? Remember your excitement when you were a senior in high school and you were going to graduate? Like, finally, I don't have to go to school anymore. And then you started getting a disease. The disease called senioritis. You guys know about it, right? It's a disease that all of a sudden makes you not care about your GPA at all anymore. And you start calculating, can I get an F on this test and still pass? What if I just don't do this paper? You guys know I don't do this project. And you start saying things like D's get degrees. You guys remember? D for diploma. Some of you guys are like, yeah, I remember that. You are so excited. Or what about when you got your license? I remember when I got my license. I could not wait. I had already bought a car. I had worked for 2 years. I bought a car. I still couldn't drive it. And my birthday's on Christmas Eve. So I called in like 6 months ahead of time and pre-scheduled an appointment for Christmas Eve. So some poor lady didn't get to spend Christmas Eve time with their family because I wanted my license so bad. I remember getting my license. So it was like freedom rung through. All my friends jumped in my car. We drove down to the mall because that was cool back then. It's not anymore. And We had a blowout on the freeway my first day driving. All my friends died, but I still have my license. No, they didn't. I was so excited. There's things that we get excited for in life. What about the first house you bought? Remember the first house you bought? You and your wife so excited. You're in that 30-day escrow that felt like it was 30 years. How many times did you go drive by that house? Tell me the truth. How many times did you re-look it up on your Redfin app or your whatever app? Because you were so excited. Well, that excitement that you had carried nothing compared to the excitement of these Israelites on this day, that they stood at the edge of the promised land singing. It was better than winning the lottery. They were a people without a home. For the first time, they were going to be a people with a home. They stood there, they could see it, they could smell it, they could throw a rock and hit it. But as we know in this story, that generation fails to take their promise. They never end up, that generation never crosses the Jordan. God places the land in front of them and they never take it. I want to look at the story and the details. I want to see what are some of the failures that the Israelites had on that day and what does it teach us this day 3,500 years later. You guys ready to finally get into the scripture? Jeez Louise, Neil. Okay, Numbers, I did this again last week. Numbers 13 verses 1 through 2 say this. Then the Lord spoke to Moses saying, send out for yourselves men so that they may spy out the land of Canaan. That was the promised land, which I am going to give. Say going to give. Which I am going to give the sons of Israel. You shall send a man from each of their father's tribe, everyone a leader among them. So here we are, they're on the edge. God says, send them out. Send out some spies. He's excited. You guys ever get really excited to give your kids a really nice gift? And you're like, goodness, when is it going to be Christmas, right? Because you can't wait because you know they're going to be excited. He says, send them out. Let them see the land. Let them see what I have prepared for them. Numbers, we're going to jump into verse 17. When Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, he said to them, this is what he's saying to the spies, go up there into the Negev. Go up into the hill country. See what the land is like, whether the people who live there are strong or weak, whether they are few or many. How is the land in which they live? Is it good, bad? And how are the cities in which they live? Are they like open camps or with fortifications? How is the land? Is it fat or is it lean? Are there any trees in it or not? I don't know why that matters. Make an effort then to go get some of the fruit of the land. I love this. What he does, what Moses does, is he sends them out to see the great blessing that God is giving them. Do you understand that? That's an important part here. Not once did he say, go see if these guys are a beatable foe. He says, go check out the land. Look at the cities. What are they like? Are they camps? Do they have their own walls? Because Moses knows God built those cities with other people for them. Do you guys understand that? All throughout, for 600 years, God has been planning out this land. He says, go check it out. This is a 600-year promise we're about to run in. Look at the cities. Look what God built for you. Look at the roads. Those are your roads. Go out. Look at the wells. See the clear water. Look at the grapes. They're huge. The schnozberries taste like schnozberries. I don't know if how many of you guys understand that one right there. That's Willy Wonka. The schnozberries taste like he's just making a point that this is going to be an incredible land. Go look at it. Bring the report back. Give faith to the people. The spies come back, and then this is what the spies say. We're going to jump to verses 27, 28, and 31. It says this, thus they told him, the spies came back, they're talking to Moses. We went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey. It is as incredible as we've always wished for. In fact, when they took some grapes, I didn't read this part about the story, but when they took the grapes, it said that they took one vine of grapes, and the grapes were so big and it was so heavy that they had to get a tree branch, tie it to the tree branch, and two guys carry it out. That's how fertile this land was. It really is a land flowing with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. They show them the grapes. But then here it comes. This is where we're going to find our first failure. Nevertheless, dang it. Like, don't you want to just stop reading right here? You stupid Israelites. Okay, nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified. What he doesn't say is the cities are strong. He says they're fortified. They're not penetrable. And they are very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak. The descendants of Anak are offspring of the Nephilim, the giants of the land. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are too strong. Look, the land, it's as good as God has said. He didn't skip one promise, but we can't take this land. It's already occupied. It's controlled by a hostile enemy. They're too big for us. The first defeat was this, that they failed to remember, here it is, that God has already spied out the land. You understand that? God, he wasn't asking them to spy out the land to see if they could militarily take it. God had already spied out the land. He had already commissioned the victory. He had already set the course. The problem was the Israelites do what Americans do all the time. We go and we spy out the promise that God gave us to weigh if we could take it. God told them to go look at the land, but instead they looked at the landscape. God said, look at the fruit. Instead, they looked at the people. God said, look at the cities. Instead, they looked at the walls. God said, look at the miracle that I'm going to do. And instead, they looked at their own lack and their own weakness. God said, look at the promise. And they looked at the problem. And they could not bring themselves to take the land. They went out to spy out the land for themselves. But I'm telling you right now, both then and now, God has already spied out their land, and God has already spied out our land. Instead of seeing the power of God to be God, they looked at themselves and what they thought they could handle. You know, I love this thing about God. Do you guys know when God makes a promise, all it takes is someone willing to stick their feet up and put one foot in front of the other. When God makes a promise, everything that is needed is already there. We just can't see it. Is that true? When God promises something, we don't need to evaluate his promises like we do when we make promises, right? My kid says, yes, Dad, I promise I'll clean my room later. I'm evaluating that promise. Well, you didn't do it last time. You didn't do it the time before. And I'm afraid to even go in there. No, you need to go do it now, right? We evaluate promises all the time. But when God makes a promise, oh, listen to me right now. There's no evaluation needed. He's already spied out the land to take care of that promise. I don't know if you feel the same way I do. But standing right here, 2022, it's like hard to say any 2020s. Knock on wood, if there was any wood. It's hard standing in 2022. I see a similarity between us and them right now. I don't know how many of you guys feel the same way, but I feel like I'm looking out over a beautiful land that is controlled by a hostile enemy. Do you guys ever feel like that? You look out over California. It's a beautiful land. It's the best in all the United States, okay? But I feel like them. I look out, and it's controlled by a hostile enemy, an enemy that hates us, an education system that hates our kids, a social system that hates our families, progressive racism that just hates all races, media that hates the truth, feminism that hates our women, leaders that hate our religion. Do you guys feel that same way? But here's what we need to remember. God has already spied out this land. And God is not done with California. You know that? He's not. He is not done. He hasn't given up on it. He doesn't want us to stand as Christians off in the back saying, hey, the land is great, but it's too much. Lots of times we have voted like that, haven't we? What's my vote count for? What's my vote matter? Why do I vote in California? It's just a throwaway. Can I tell you something? I felt like that way for a long time. But when When Roe versus Wade was overturned, my goodness, I don't feel like that anymore. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? God in there, he had a plan. He worked it through. What I never thought was possible became possible. And now I have so much hope for November. That's what works. You read the news and they say the exact opposite. They say, well, the whole abortion thing has really flipped the odds back to the Democrats. Baloney. I think it's given Christians the hope that actually things are going to change on a political level. We have to remember that God is not done with California. He set the course. He's commissioned the victory. He said, where our feet go, we get to have the victory. Do you know that? He said, if he that is for you, no, he said, if I am for you, then who can be against you? And that counts in this city too. Can I give you a reason to stay in California right now? We all have reasons not to. I want to give you a reason to stay in California. God's not done with California. That's good enough right there. But I'm going to give you another one. Do you know that there are more revivals in the state of California than any other state in the United States? I heard a guy say this a couple weeks ago at a conference, and I called my dad. I was like, hey, let's count these out. And he's like, oh my goodness, Neil, you're right. More revivals have come from California than any other state. And now let me ask you this question. Wait, how many of us like revival? Can we all agree revival needs to come? Where is revival going to happen? Just let's use our minds and what we know about God and what we've seen. Is revival going to happen in some Midwestern city where 70% of them already know God and go to church every day and have the blessings of God in their life? Or is likely revival going to start in a broken land with broken people that have been lied to all their life, that are stuck in sin and need God to redeem them? I can't leave California because I don't want to miss the revival God's going to bring someday. I can't do it. It's a land under siege, and I can't wait to see what God does. These Israelites, they stopped looking at what the promise of God. Instead, they looked at the problem. I love what God does. God creates impossible things. He creates out of impossible situation, God creates possibilities. Isn't that true? I'm gonna tell you something cool that happened just 10 days ago. I don't know, 9, 8, I don't know, somewhere around there. We're talking about being in a hostile land. But I think God is trying to turn the land. 10 days ago, we get a call from Parkway Plaza. You know, the church of Parkway Plaza, right? That's not a church. They contact us, and they say, we need for you guys to put a youth venture in our mall. That's God, right? We need a youth venture in our mall. We need you to come and bring Jesus. I mean, they didn't say that, but they were saying that because God has already spied out this city and he knows what he wants to do to take it, and he's not done. And it gets even better. They said, we're gonna pay to put you in there. We're gonna cover the electricity. We're gonna cover the water. And now we're just working out the details. God has already looked out and spied out the land. Are we going to cross the Jordan, or are we going to spy it on our own? Okay, let's move to the next point. Let's go to the next defeat. This is Israel's response. We're going to move now. We're going to actually change chapters. We're going to go from Numbers 13. We're going to go to Deuteronomy 1. Deuteronomy 1 is Moses recapping Numbers 13. And he gives us more details in his recap. So it's the same story. Deuteronomy 1:28. This is Israel's response to hearing the spies' report. The spies say, we can't do it. They forgot. They thought it was their job to spy out the land, to see the military people in there. And then all of Israel responds. Deuteronomy 1:28. Where can we go up? Our brethren have made our hearts melt. Say, hearts melt. It made our hearts melt We're covered in fear. All courage has left us. They've stolen every exciting thing that we thought about this land. Oh. Saying the people are big. Oh, they're bigger. They're taller than we are. And the cities are large and they're fortified to heaven. You ever seen a wall go all the way up to heaven? And besides, we saw the sons of Anakim there. And they decided they would not go. They decided, we're not taking the land. It's too big. God, the promise you gave, it's no longer available. God, you're not that big. And here was that second defeat. The second defeat happened when they embraced their fear. You guys, all of us have fears, don't we? All of us have fear. We all are afraid of one thing or another, come up with fear. The problem is when we embrace it and we own it and we wear it, we take it on. And that's what they did. Their hearts melt. Fear was so deep inside of them, they couldn't even see straight. Walls went up to heaven. I would love to see a wall up to heaven. That's never happened. The Empire State Building doesn't go up to heaven. But it feared them. Now, this is interesting. We're going to take this story real quick, and we're going to pull it here. Their hearts melted. Say, their hearts melted. Now, we're going to fast forward 40 years. Because if you remember, this is an interesting story. When you remember, when we get to look forward, fast forward to the next generation. Remember, there was 40 years later, the next generation stood on the other side of the Jordan. It was called Kadesh Barnea. The same area, they stood looking at the same land 40 years later. I want to show you what they said because it's very interesting. This is in Joshua 2. 40 years later, Joshua now, leading all of the Israelites, sends out 2 spies. It's the same thing. Sends out 2 spies. The 2 spies cross the Jordan. They go straight to Jericho, which is the first city that they're going to encounter. And they go into Jericho and they look at the place and they look at the land and the fruit and they find a lady named Rahab and they stay the night at Rahab's house. Listen to what Rahab says. Rahab says she's a Canaanite woman. Joshua 2 verses 9 and 10. Remember, the Israelites' hearts melted 40 years later. And she, Rahab, said to them, I know that the Lord has given you, the Israelites, the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard now that the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea before you. Where am I? And when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites when you were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. Okay, I just want to tell you something really neat. Really neat. Who was afraid this time? The enemy. Do you guys get that? The enemy was afraid. But even more interesting, she said our hearts melted. Why? Because of the things God did with the first generation coming out of Egypt, moving all the way up to the Jordan. This is so good, you guys. The same time the enemy was giving fear to the Israelites, all the Canaanites and all the Amalekites were dreading in fear the oncoming. They knew, they had terror. They knew that the Israelites were going to take them. Do you understand that? But instead of taking the land, that first generation, even though the terror was in the land, that first generation missed it because they embraced something that the enemy was trying to give them. I'm going to tell you something about fear. Do you guys know fear is transferable? Yeah, right? Any man that is hid behind a wall and jumped out and scared his wife, transferred fear onto her, right? I gave her fear. You guys know what I'm talking about? We were at, I'm reminded of, when I was in college, my college years, before I was dating my wife, they used to do these girls' nights. I don't know what they did in the girls' nights. I just assumed that they just looked at pictures of us, right? I don't know what they did. They did things, whatever it was. Well, this one time, we find out that one of the girls is house sitting this big house with this big yard, and all of the girls are going over there. All of our college-age girls are going over there for an overnighter in a big house that they're not used to. And as men, we're like, we have to scare them. That's what we have to do. So we found out the address of the house, and we all go over there to scare them. Now, we forgot how smart these girls were. Because what they did is they leaked out the information on purpose because they knew we couldn't handle it. And they were all on the other side of the yard with water balloons. Yeah, they're mean, okay? How dare they? So here's what happened. So we are coming up to this house that we've never been at. I mean, honest truth, we're not even sure this is the right house. There's a little bit of fear, like, in the dark, there's like a group of you guys going up this street that you shouldn't be on because you're gonna do something you shouldn't do. And the house is here and the two sides have a fence to the backyard. And we're up underneath the fence and we're guarded down like this. And we're thinking, I don't want to just bang on a window. What if it's not the right house? So we think, let's go into the backyard and let's just start making noise and walk by a window or something, scare them. And so little do we know the girls are all on the other side. They had a lookout person and they've got water balloons ready to pelt the loving bejesus out of us, okay? And Jeremy Miller, this is literally what happened. Jeremy Miller, he's got a hood on. He's like, I'm gonna look up over the fence to see what it's like on the other side. So he looks over the fence and he looks and he puts his head down. And then we hear an insane amount of terror and screaming and running. We're like, what's going on? We just hear this. Well, my wife's on the other side, girlfriend's on the other side. She tells me the story later. What happened was they're all sitting. They've got water balloons. They're so excited, but they are in a neighborhood they don't know, in a big house they don't know, with probably some murderers in the backyard with them right now. Because girls love the dark, and they know we're there. But they see a man with a hood, head come up over the fence, look around, go back down, and they all drop their balloons, scream, and run into the house. So we're now in the backyard. We're gonna be making noise. We're like, well, there's water balloons over here. And they're like, there's water balloons over here. So we're throwing them through the windows of the house. We didn't do that. Fear is an interesting thing. Fear can be transferred. This is important to understand for us, that fear can be transferred. The enemy wants to give us fear so we will not carry out the promises of God. Is this true? But when a Christian stands up and says, I am going to take on God's faith and I'm not going to live in the enemy's fear, then the enemy starts to become afraid of that person. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? A man or a woman who's a Christian who have decided, I'm going to fear God more than I'm going to fear the the enemy scares the enemy. Do you guys know that? Listen to her. Joshua, this is the next verse. Rahab, the next verse, Joshua 2:11, she says this, when we heard of it, our hearts melted. Remember? Melted. The Israelites' hearts melted. This time, the Canaanites' hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you, for the Lord. Then she starts praising God. For the Lord, your God, he is God of heaven above and on earth below. She was so afraid of these guys, she started praising their God. Amen. Can I tell you something right now? I've already made a decision. I've made a decision for my life, okay? I'm letting you know right now. I've already made the decision. I'm gonna scare the enemy. I'm gonna do it. I want the enemy to be afraid of me, and I'm not gonna take on any of his fear. Have you made that decision yet? I already know. I am going to pastor this church in a way that scares the enemy. I want everywhere where this church goes, everywhere where God sends us, to every country he puts us, I want the enemy to get on edge. I remember something, yeah. God, and he will, he will. Listen, I remember this. My dad one time, we were doing some ministry, and this young adult started manifesting a demonic spirit. And so we were praying over this young man. He didn't want the demon anymore, and we're praying over him, and there wasn't a lot that was going on. And we're praying, it's taking some time, and my dad hears about what's going on, so he comes over. I think it was at a camp, if I remember. And he comes over, and I kid you not, this is what happened. I'll never forget this. We're all praying on him. We're all Christians. We love God. We're praying over him. When my dad enters into the room, this young adult looks up, and the demonic speaks out of him. And it says, no. It looks at Mark. No, not him. Anybody but him. Because my dad lived in a way that scared the enemy. Do you guys know what I'm talking about right now? We get to live in ways that scare the enemy if we will stop embracing the fear that he gives us. When we reject his fear, we take on God's faith. We become the very fear inside the enemy that he wanted to give us. Listen, two things that they failed. Number one, they failed to remember that God had already spied out the land. God has already spied out our land. They failed in embracing the fear. It's time we stop embracing fear. The fear of going to our neighbors to tell them about Christ, the fear of going and talking about Jesus in our workplace, the fear of whatever it is, becoming the Ned Flanders of our neighborhood. I'm always the Ned Flanders of my neighborhood, and I like it. The last thing is this is the shorter one, is they failed to underestimate. They failed and they underestimated God's command. This is interesting. People do this all the time. When God calls us to do something, we weigh the cost of what's going to happen if we do that. And we forget to weigh the cost of disobeying God. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? God's like, you should go do this thing. And we're like, oh, I don't know. Let me think about it. How about think about what is the consequence of not doing what God says? You guys know there's a consequence, right? He makes it very clear inside of his Bible. Well, let's look at the consequence from these guys. The Israelites decided, we're not going. The cost is too high. I don't care what you promised, God. This isn't going to happen. And then God says, Numbers 14, verses 32 through 35, he says this. This is what he tells all the Israelites because they would not follow. Your sons, meaning anybody under 20, because he's going to give a way worse pronouncement to everybody over 20. Your sons shall be shepherds for 40 years in the wilderness, and they will suffer for your unfaithfulness until everybody 20 and over, corpses lie in the wilderness, according to the number of days which you spied out the land, 40 days. For every day you shall bear your guilt a year, even 40 years, and you will know my opposition. And I, the Lord, have spoken. Surely this I will do to all this evil congregation who are gathered today against me. In this wilderness they shall be destroyed, and there they will die. Oh man, that's heavy. A heavy dose of reality hit these guys. They all of a sudden realized, they remembered, oh yeah, there's a consequence for disobeying God. We have to remember, God's commands to us are not, if you feel like it, they're not suggestatory, are they? Is that a word? They're not suggestive. I'm the king of making up words. I should write a dictionary so all my words are in it. They're not suggestive. They're commands. You want to know what Israel does? I'm not going to read it right now. Numbers 14, 40 through 42. Israel goes, oh no, what have we done? I don't know if you guys know the rest of the story. Oh no, what have we done? We have not done as the Lord said. He said we're all going to die in this wilderness. So they wake up the next morning. They put on all of their gear. They go up into the hill country. They're like, yeah, we're going to go attack these Amalekites. And Moses says, too little, too late, guys. Lord's not going to be with you. Don't do it. Don't grieve yourselves. They're like, no, we're going to do it. I mean, you guys know opportunities have a shelf life. Is that true? They're there one moment and they're gone. If we don't take them, they won't continue to be there. So these Israelites went out and they went to fight against the Amalekites and they got their butts whooped. They died. Many of them died. They had regret for what they did. They forgot the intensity of the commands of the Lord. Don't underestimate what God commands. You will always regret it. They do studies on regret. These studies they've done, and they put regret into two different categories. The regret of action and the regret of inaction. The regret of action is regretting the things that you did. And the regret of inaction is regretting not doing the things that you should have done. And they've learned through these studies that over the short term, people regret their actions more. They regret the things that they did. When you look over things about a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they regret the things they did. But it flops heavily when they look over the course of their life. Do you guys know that the greatest regrets you're going to have in your life are the things that you never did? When they did this study, that people regret, over the course of their life, people regret action only at 16%, but they regret their inaction at 84%. Because because the regretting action tastes bad in your mouth, but regretting the inactions of life leave a bitter taste in our mouth for the rest of our lives, don't they? The what ifs. What if I would have done what God said? Don't raise your hand if you have that. What if I would have done the thing that God had called me to do? What if I would have walked out in faith instead of fear in this situation? What if I would have talked to my coworker before he got in that fatal car accident? What if I would have been a light in my neighborhood before this event, whatever that event happened? What if all Christians voted in November? Do you guys know what would happen? We take the land in a single evening. What if I volunteered in that ministry? What if I gave to that ministry, charity? The greatest regrets at the end of our lives won't be the things that we did wrong, you guys. It'll be the things that we never had the faith to do. You know that? It'll be the thing, let's get the band up here, the things that we never had the faith to do, the land that we never went after. The question we need to ask ourselves this morning is, will I cross the Jordan? Will I do what it takes to take this city, to take this land, to turn all the things I hate that are going on around me into things that I support? What will I do? I'm going to tell you, there's a disease. This is real, and you can Google it and look it up. Everything on Google is true. It's called the sitting disease. Look it up. Article after article after article on the sitting disease. It's diseases that happen with people who sit too much. 34 chronic ailments come to people who sit too much. Death, cardiometabolic disease, cognitive dysfunction, diabetes, coronary artery disease, Alzheimer's disease. I'm not going to read through all 34 real diseases that happen for people who sit too much. Does that preach or what? God has not made us to sit and watch what goes on. God has created us to stand and to fight. Do you know that? If we sit too long, it goes against how God has created us. But when we stand and fight, we throw off our fear. We put on God's faith. We get to take the land. Let's stand up right now. Listen, I want you to know something. God is not done with California. God is not done with your neighborhood. God is not done with your workplace. Listen to me, God is not done with your family. What generation is he going to have to wait for to take the land? Do you understand what I'm saying? What people are we going to be? I want to ask you right now, are you willing to start looking at this city differently? To start looking at November differently. Listen, when Roe versus Wade was overturned, my mind went, pow, and I cannot wait for November now. I cannot wait to get there in November and watch my mind explode again with what God can do if the church gets energized. I can't wait to see revival come and all of us gain faith to evangelize our neighborhoods because we're going to take the land and watch the churches across San Diego explode. I want to see it.